Good evening. I'm Lady Nopeingham. Tonight's episode is a collection of short horror stories by talented writers who have shared their work on Reddit and generously allowed me to share them with you. Their info and links will be included in the notes below. Being that we are now in the week leading up to All Hallows Eve, I am going to try to post as many videos as possible, so please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of the great stories to come. Please also take a moment to like this video if you enjoy it, as it helps the channel tremendously. And now, without any further ado, let's get into tonight's creepy collection. The Tooth Fairy. Jessica was a student in my class, and she was obsessed with the Tooth Fairy. "I seen where the Tooth Fairy keeps 'em all," she said to Elijah. Elijah grabbed an eraser from the box and frowned. "No, you haven't. No kids ever get to see the Tooth Fairy's castle, 'cause only the Tooth Fairy gets to go to the castle." "What castle?" Jessica snapped. "The castle. That's what the Tooth Fairy takes the teeth for making the castle." "Nuh-uh, it's a big pile. As big as a big giant mountain," argued Jessica. By the end of the day, I dealt with several incidents, including, but not limited to, paint-covered clothes, biting, and the purposeful decapitation of a doll. Therefore, the Tooth Fairy conversation all but slipped my mind until the next day. The next morning, Jessica was sitting with Megan, and they were chatting animatedly. I was moving around the classroom to each table to check how they were getting on when I heard them. "It's not a castle. Why does everybody say that? And the Tooth Fairy isn't a she, it's a boy," said Jessica. "No, she's a girl," argued Megan. "Boy, girl, boy, girl, boy." "Wow, that's a beautiful picture, Megan. Do you think that you could tell me about it?" I interrupted. "This is Daddy, and this is Roger, and this is me, and we are all playing football. Look, that's the football." "You all look so happy. I really like those big smiles. Do you think you could write your names underneath?" She nodded happily and started scrawling Megan, Daddy, and Roja below the figures. "And what about you, Jessica? Can you tell me a bit about your drawing?" "I drawed Mummy and Daddy and me in a tent, and we're all sleeping so close together. You gotta sleep close together in a tent, else you get too cold, see?" "You all look very warm and cozy in there," I replied. Jessica's parents were divorced, and there was something kind of heartbreaking about seeing her picture of the three of them together. "Yeah, and there's no one else around, see? So Mummy and Daddy just play with me all the time, and we play all day and all night except to sleep and to eat." "And where is it that you're camping?" She paused for a moment. "In the woods, I think, so I should draw some trees. Real big trees, as big as the sky." I smiled and moved to the next table. As soon as I moved, I heard from behind me. "Girl, boy, girl." A week later, Simon lost a tooth in class. They were at the age where teeth were just starting to fall out, so it was quite an exciting moment. Two girls hugged him tight in comfort. One of the boys asked if they could touch it. Another asked if they could try to put it back in. Jessica wailed loudly, her hands clasping her face as she stared at Simon in horror. Simon was not perturbed by this in the slightest. He grinned proudly, his smile now gappier than before. He placed the wrapped-up tooth in his bag, excited to show his parents. I reassured Jessica and sat them all on the carpet to talk about what happened. "Simon lost his tooth today. Simon, can you tell everyone what that felt like?" "For days and days it's been wobbling and wobbling, and Ma'am said that it should soon come out. She said I shouldn't play with it, so I only played with it a little bit. Just right now, I was playing at the water table and felt it fall in my mouth, and I thought it might fall down into my belly, but I spitted it out first." "Did it hurt?" whispered Jessica. No, not even a little bit. Feels nice when I put my tongue in it. Look, he said. Then he opened his mouth awkwardly, his tongue stuck through the gap. Gross, cried out Megan. It's completely normal for children to lose their teeth. What you all have now are called milk teeth, or sometimes they're called baby teeth. Over the next few years, they'll fall out, but that doesn't mean anything is wrong. You'll start to get new teeth, and they will be your adult teeth, which you will keep forever. When they fall out, the tooth fairy takes them, and he only likes real white teeth, said Jessica. I smiled. As a teacher, it wasn't my place to confirm nor deny the existence of Santa, unicorns, fairies, or festive bunnies to my students. Well, it's very important to keep our teeth clean. We should brush our teeth twice a... I don't want to clean my teeth. I don't want the tooth fairy to have them, Jessica squealed. Then she burst into tears. Admittedly, I couldn't blame her. The tooth fairy thing had always struck me as odd. You tell your kid that when they're sleeping, a stranger comes into their room and starts rummaging around under their pillow, but it's all good because they give you some money. Yet very few parents seem to consider that it might be a bit frightening. I managed to calm things down, and we carried on with the day. At the end of the day, at pickup time, I explained to Jessica's mum what had happened, and she assured me that she would deal with it. I got a secret to tell you, Jessica said the next day. I got a secret, but you can't tell no one else, okay? Well, I can't promise to keep secrets, Jessica. Sometimes there are big secrets. They might involve you or someone else being hurt in some way. Then I have to tell those kinds of secrets. Well, the secret is that Daddy is the tooth fairy, she whispered. Now that you know that, does it make you feel less frightened? You seemed very worried yesterday, I said. She looked confused. I already know Daddy was the tooth fairy. I just didn't want to tell the other kids, but I still don't want Daddy to take my teeth. Maybe you could talk to Mummy and Daddy about it, and you could tell them what you would like to do with your teeth when they fall out. But I don't want Daddy to take my teeth. When he takes people's teeth, it really hurts, and they scream and cry, she sobbed. The bell rang then for lunch, and I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, confused, as I grabbed my lunch and sat next to my colleague Sarah in the staff room. Jessica? I taught her brother last year. Their dad's a dentist, Sarah said. Oh, I said. That makes sense. Haven't met the dad yet. I only met him once all year. Usually Mum does the school stuff. He's quiet, but hot. I laughed. You're so bad. He is, and the Mum's not much of a looker. I wonder if that's why he left her. Sarah! What? It's true. Anyway, what are you going to do about Jessica? I'll talk to her this afternoon, and then maybe talk to her mum again. Poor kid. She's under the impression that her dad is a tooth fairy who randomly yanks out people's teeth. Well, nobody likes the dentist, Sarah grinned. That afternoon, I sat with Jessica in the reading corner. Hi, Jessica. I'd like to speak with you about what happened earlier. It sounded like you were really frightened about losing your teeth. I wonder if maybe we could talk about it more? Okay, she said. Do you know much about your dad's job? He's a dentist, she said, and he's a tooth fairy. Do you know what dentists do? They take people's teeth, and it really hurts so much, but they take them anyways. Dentists care for people's teeth. They check they're healthy. Sometimes people might have problems with their teeth, so the dentists fix them. Sometimes, when a tooth is really bad, it can't be saved. Then a dentist might need to take it out. But usually, the bad tooth was very painful, and after it gets taken out, it starts to feel much better. We can look after our teeth to keep them healthy. But if you ever did need to have a tooth taken out, the dentist gives you some special medicine so that it doesn't hurt. Well, Daddy can't be that kind of dentist. He's a different kind. He takes good teeth. And it really hurts. I heard it. The lady screamed, and she even screamed louder than when I broke my arm on the swing, and that time I screamed so loud that Mommy said they probably heard me all the way to Africa. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean? When did you hear that? Were you at your dad's work? No, he was downstairs in the room where it's not safe to go in. I'm not supposed to go there. But that time, I just standed on the stairs, just for a little minute. But I didn't go inside, I promise. And that's when I heard it, and it was a lady's voice, and she screamed. Did you see anything that happened, Jessica? No, but I know he was taking her teeth, 'cause he takes so many teeth. And no matter what anyone says, he isn't building a castle. He keeps them all in a jar in a big, big, big pile. And they're all really white. He's the tooth fairy, so he only likes clean teeth. What? But don't tell him I seen it. 'Cause I'm not supposed to go in his room, but I thought maybe he had my birthday present in there. And I just wanted to see what it was. I wanted to have a little look so I could know how excited I could be. That's when I seen the teeth. I putted them back so he won't ever know. Jessica did. And then yesterday in the car, Mummy said that people tell their kids there's a tooth fairy, but really it's just the mummies and daddies who gives the kids the money. And I already know that Daddy is the tooth fairy, but I couldn't tell her, else she would have known I'd done something bad. I don't want Daddy to be the tooth fairy and take my teeth. As she spoke, I felt the blood drain from me all at once. As words tumbled out of the poor, confused girl, who was unable to stop when she started, my confusion turned to fear, which turned to complete and utter terror. When she finished, she looked up at me expectantly, her eyes searching mine desperately. Ignoring the pounding of my heart, I told her that she had done the right thing in telling me. I told her she wasn't going to get into trouble, and she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her that it was all going to be okay. 128 adult teeth were found at Jessica's house. They belonged to 4 women who had been reported missing over the last 5 years. The women were different ages, different races, different backgrounds. The only thing they had in common were their pearly white teeth. Jessica's father had kept the teeth of the women he had murdered as trophies. Even now, years later, I think of Jessica whenever one of my students thrusts one of their teeth excitedly in my face in class. And after Jessica, when I have children of my own, there will be no fairies, of the tooth variety or otherwise, in my house. Hamburger Lady. Beyond the light of our cameras, we couldn't see much of anything but the shadowy ruins of Robertson Elementary School. The moon was thick and heavy, shining brightly on the ground and through the overgrown remnants of the playground equipment. Christina was much braver than I. She wanted to lead the way, and I didn't hesitate to let her. The way the pitch darkness of the building just seemed to be waiting on us to walk into it was unnerving to me. But to Christina, the desire to explore was freshly lit in her soft blue eyes. She was even more beautiful when she was brave. The whole town knew the story about Robertson Elementary School. It caught fire in 1976, burned upwards from the basement-level cafeteria, and eventually claimed the whole building. Luckily, the students were on recess when the inferno started, but one unfortunate cafeteria lady was unable to flee the destruction. She died in the back corner of the cooking space. Pictures of Maria Aria showed that she was beautiful. The fire was so hot, though, that she was completely unrecognizable when the responders discovered her. It was a tragic accident that still haunted the memories of our small town. Christina wanted to become viral. She heard the ghost story about Maria Aria, the Hamburger Lady, and thought she could become infamous for leading a live-streamed ghost hunt. She wanted me to be the cameraman, and I couldn't refuse turning my crush's whims away. Everything was going well until we got down to the cafeteria. The walls were still black, even after almost 50 years, and there was a stench of mold and abandonment that hung heavy in the air. Mice scattered everywhere when we got down there, and I don't know exactly how to describe it, but there was just this feeling that we were not supposed to be there. Christina admitted that she felt it too, but to her it was more of an invitation to keep pressing forward than to retreat. We made our way around the cafeteria, climbing over tables and broken chairs. When we reached the cooking space at the back of the room, we just paused and filmed. The air got cold. The silence was deafening. I couldn't stop my hand from shaking, and that's why the footage is so wobbly. Christina called out to the darkness, "Maria, Maria Arya, are you with us?" The camera flickered at that instant, and we heard this shuffling behind the remains of the serving counter. The figure of a dark-haired woman formed out of nowhere. Her skin was melted and charred. Her eyes were vacant, clothes hanging loosely in blackened strands. She let out this piercing wail, and we just ran. In the pitch darkness, Christina and I must have gotten separated. I got to the stairway leading up to the ground-level landing and waited for Christina to get me. She never did, and all I heard was this unnerving shuffling of feet in the blackness of the cafeteria. That's all I know about Christina's disappearance. I wish I could tell you more, but I can't. I don't know anything more. But in every dream that I have dreamt since that night, whether a nightmare or not, Christina is always in the background somewhere. She's screaming for help, arms reaching out wildly towards me. But that hideous figure, the Hamburger lady, always appears behind her and steals her back into the darkness. The Darkroom. I lie awake, the dream of sleep evading my grasp. Today, we laid to rest my father in the cold, damp earth. Our relationship was not one you'd call ideal, but being his only child, I was left everything. That included his photography studio and darkroom. My father and mother had split when I was born, him having no time to raise a child, as he made his name in the art community. A birthday card every couple of years, always with the wrong age written in them, and that was all I saw of him. I didn't mind much, having my mother there was enough. But then he died, and I received everything. I wondered why he would leave his life's work to me, a daughter he never bothered to know. I'm sure he had friends, or fellow photographers, who would have greatly appreciated their own studio and fully operational darkroom. Maybe he really didn't have anyone, and no one else to leave it to. I myself was a photographer, but more of a casual one. I took photos of my pets, friends, and family, the occasional scenery, nothing that was taken for others' admiration. It was for me to relive moments that made life worth living. The next day, I drove to the address listed on the scrap of paper my father's lawyer gave me. It was on the outskirts of town and seemed to be the only building out there. The building itself was that of a large warehouse. The metal paneling on its walls was rusted in spots and completely missing in others. Its few windows were smashed and boarded up with wooden planks from the inside. There was a large garage door that shuddered in the breeze. To the right of that door was a smaller door, which also had a broken window. The place looked like a hollow monolith, and I almost doubted that it was my father's studio. How could such a highly esteemed artist work out of such a dump? It was dull, falling apart, and devoid of any signs of life. The one thing that told me this disgusting place was indeed my father's was the painted camera lens on the garage door, with my father's name written underneath. I gripped the little metal key in my hand and entered the decaying giant. The inside was more appealing than the out, but not by much. There was a long metal table in the center of the room, littered with cameras, photos, and lenses. For an artist who cared more about his work than his family, he really didn't take very good care of his equipment. A layer of dust coated everything, and most likely ruined everything on the table. Back behind the table, though, was the darkroom. It was a large, handcrafted black box that had been erected in the back center part of the warehouse. A door that revolved was the only entrance, and made it so that no light could penetrate into its dark interior. I slowly walked along the table, trailing my fingers along the dust. The photos were all black and white, most likely developed in the darkroom behind me. They were photos of buildings, animals, flowers, the normal things photographers photograph. I picked up an old Canon film camera and poured a pile of dust out from where the film reel would be installed. Disgusted, I tossed it back onto the table and turned to the looming black box. Everything on the table was now useless, and I was disappointed to see such beautiful antique equipment left to deteriorate. The revolving door wouldn't budge at first, and I struggled to get it to turn. The metal railing along the bottom must have rusted. How long has it been since my father was last here? It was like this place hadn't seen a living soul in decades. With one hard shove, the door finally relented and spun to let me step in. The smell of mildew and old chemicals hit me like a brick wall. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a gag as I stepped into the door. I should have brought a ventilator or at least a mask. As I swung the revolving door around me, I was plunged into utter darkness. The smell was overpowering, and I tried to take as few breaths as possible. I could see the glow of the red light start to appear when the door jammed. I pushed, and the metal groaned in protest. I was trapped inside the door and could barely see anything around me. I held my breath and used the hand previously covering my mouth to try to pull the door open. A small ball of panic started to settle in my chest as I fought harder to release myself from my cylindrical prison. Just as I was about to gasp in that putrid air, the door gave and swung open. The red light of the bulbs barely illuminated the room, and I had to wait as my eyes adjusted to the dark. I held the collar of my shirt over my nose and mouth and coughed violently. The smell was now overpowering, and my head was beginning to spin. Just a quick look, just to see if anything was salvageable, then I could leave. Stepping into the room, I could see strings running across the room with photos pinned to them to dry. Empty containers of chemicals littered the floor, and the faucet in the sink was dripping. I knew how darkrooms and developing film worked, but had never actually stepped foot into one. I couldn't help it as a bit of excitement fluttered in my chest. I had always wanted to develop my own film and expose my own photos. I ran my hand over the edge of the metal sink and dreamed of making my very own darkroom. My eyes drifted to the photos hanging from the string, and I squinted to try to see what they were of. My hand fell from my face as I stumbled back in alarm. That couldn't be what I thought it was, could it? In the first still photograph was a woman. She wasn't posed or smiling. Her lips were locked in an eternal scream, and I could see the glint of a knife embedded in her chest. The next photo was similar, but was a different woman, and the knife now protruded from her left eye. Photo after photo portrayed a gruesome scene. All held a young woman, trapped forever in their final moments of fear and despair. Their faces wore masks of horror, shock, and death. I could feel bile rising up my throat, and I backed away from the awful nightmare before me. I know now why my father left me his darkroom. I know now why he left my mother and me. I now know the dark secrets behind my father's legacy, hidden away inside his darkroom. The Last Man on Earth. The Mustang roared to life. The body of the beast shook as he stepped on the accelerator, his manic laugh piercing the day. His laughter ceased as he sat for a moment listening to the noise produced by the car. Having his fill of the exhaust system, Dan threw the gear knob up and to the left, first gear, and sped out of the dealership. The car was a display model, the red paint gleaming in the bright lights of the showroom. He crashed through the glass of the shop and onto the street, laughing like a naughty child who had gotten away with a misdeed. The scream of the car, the only noise in the desolate street. There wasn't many cars on the road, and Dan pushed the machine as hard as it could go, the speedometer needle climbing until it sat constant at the top speed it could get to. The drab buildings whizzed by as Dan clutched to the steering wheel, the brilliant sun smiling down on the bright red Mustang, galloping down the empty streets. Slowing the car down, Dan switched the radio on. Static greeted him. Glancing around the streets, HVC was a welcome sight. Slowing his newly acquired vehicle to a complete stop, he opened the door and set towards the music store. The door was locked, naturally, and Dan made use of a trash can sitting on the sidewalk. He winced as it went through the window, nervously looking around. He laughed softly to himself. No one was around to see him. The lights in the store were non-functional, but thankfully the sun bearing down was bright enough to illuminate his shopping trip. He walked through the aisles, looking for something worth listening to. Eventually, Dan stumbled upon a CD of the top songs of the decade. Nothing special, but it would do. Picking up his selection, he climbed back out towards his car, using the makeshift entry he made. Sitting in the driver's seat with the door open, Dan opened the CD case and inserted the CD. Music blared out the speakers, the voice of Justin Timberlake serenading The Lonely Man. He sat, staring at the hole he created in the store window. He looked up and down the street, hoping someone would bound up to him to seek justice for the theft that had occurred. He was foolish to hope, but the hope remained. He'd go home now and do what he did every day, read comic books and drink himself unconscious. Leaving the music playing with the door open, Dan walked past the music shop and towards the bottle store he frequented. The door had been left open, and so he had not needed to improvise an entrance. He had a hankering for whiskey today, he decided. Walking over to the cabinet containing the good stuff, he accessed the expensive whiskey by kicking through the glass door. Open bottle in hand and already visibly depleted, Dan walked back slowly to his car to head home. He had changed homes a number of times this past year. Just as with the cars, appliances, and everything else, Dan had his pick of it all. He was, after all, the last man on earth. Everyone else had simply vanished. He remembered the day it started all too well. Leaving work early with a stomach bug, he took a nap once home and suitably drugged up on medicine. Waking up from the nap, everyone was just gone. No bodies, no mess, nothing. Just him, Dan, the 32-year-old marketing manager of a high-end retail company. Perplexed at first, it didn't take him long to unwind and make the best of the situation. No people meant no rules and no boundaries. Everything was his, and that suited him just fine. He had no family apart from his mom and grandparents. These were the first places he went once he realized something had gone terribly wrong. At both houses, there was not a sign of any of them. Just as everyone else had, they had disappeared. Dan spent the first few nights in his childhood home trying to make sense of all that had happened. Eventually, he gave up trying to understand it all and went back to his flat. Netflix still worked, and his PlayStation was operating fine. The days passed, and boredom set in. Call of Duty was not as fun with no one to challenge online. Dan ventured out of his house to explore and seek any other possible survivors of whatever had happened. Driving his 2002 Toyota Vitz, The realization set in that he could borrow any car he liked. He figured if he returned it before the people came back, no one would ever know. His first acquisition was a BMW M3 Coupe, a car he had dreamed of since he was a child. Hunting for the keys was difficult in the dealership, but once he found them, it was all worthwhile. Dan ventured to many a city, both near and far, in the hopes of finding someone. All his voyages were in vain, as each day he returned home dejected and with a sense of loneliness. Eventually, he stopped trying to find people and decided to enjoy his life while he was still breathing. Cars were his main devices for enjoyment, but the bottle stores and houses he raided to find narcotics were equally as entertaining. Many a day was spent in a zombie-like state, with no one to reprimand him for operating high-performance vehicles under the influence. His mind was his own worst enemy. Plagued by loneliness and fear of what had happened to the world, many a night were sleepless. What was he going to do once the electricity switched off and the water was no longer running? Having no knowledge of the ways in which either worked, Dan was frightened of living in a powerless and waterless world. Food would inevitably run out, and he had no expertise in growing crops. These were the thoughts that haunted him, and when such hauntings occurred, sleep in a bottle was to his aid. Arriving home in his new Mustang, he parked it alongside the numerous cars he now owned. It had been many months, nearly a year, and his car collection had grown vast. He walked up the unkempt driveway and walked into the open house. He didn't bother locking anything, as no one was around to steal. Flipping through a Flash comic book, he drank the whiskey from the bottle. It burnt his lips and throat, but the pain kept him sane. That and the exhilaration from driving at breakneck speeds were the only sensations that reminded Dan he was still alive. Putting the comic down, he walked the halls of his new mansion. The antique paintings he stole from museums and art galleries hung side by side on the walls. In that other life, he would never have owned such a grand home. Now, however, the world really was his oyster. He was the king of everything, and all in the land belonged to him. Setting himself down after lighting a fire in the library fireplace, he returned to his bottle of fire. Sighing, he could but lament the passing of the world as he knew it. This was the world now, a world that, for some reason, he was condemned to walk alone. He missed his mother and his grandparents. Hell, he even missed his mean SOB of a boss. This was no life to live. He took another deep sip of whiskey and sat, staring into the roaring fire. Just as brightly as the fire burnt, so too could it be immediately snuffed out. The fragility of it was incredibly similar to people. We were a strong people, and yet somehow the rest of the world now has disappeared. Standing up, Dan looked at his options he had been putting together over the weeks. The prescription bottle lay neatly next to the revolver he found in the upstairs bedroom. Deciding on the seemingly less painful approach, Dan emptied the contents of the pill bottle into his hand. Sitting down in the chair by the fire again, he gazed into the fire one last time, washing the pills down with the last of the whiskey. Dan closed his eyes as he prepared to take one last nap. The embers burnt gently in the fireplace. The fire had died down. Dan felt warmth on his chest. Struggling to sit up, he opened his eyes slowly. Had the tablets not worked? Why was he able to open his eyes? Maybe I'm in purgatory, Dan thought to himself. With a haze over his eyes, he looked down to establish what warmed his chest. Spread across his chest and running down to a puddle on his lap was vomit. A few tablets were visible in the sick, but majority seemed to have been absorbed. Shaking his head and trying to make sense of the sick cosmic joke of surviving 2 deadly naps, Dan slowly looked around the dimly lit room. The haze began to fade, and the intense sensation of pain set in. The pain went from a sensation to be the only feeling Dan felt. He felt as though his lower body was on fire. Panic set in, and Dan looked around the room trying to make sense of the pain. A dark figure was hunched over the floor near the fireplace. Upon hearing his screams of agony, the figure stood. Cast in the glow of the embers, Dan could see what looked like a leg. Another leg was protruding from the embers. The figure bundled over to him, and Dan could immediately smell the coppery smell of blood. "Hello there," the figure said. "I got here just in time. Had I let you pass, your meat would have quickly expired. Now you have a good few days left." Dan began to sob. His strength left him, and he simply lay there, covered in his own vomit. The man spoke again. "You would not believe how long it's been since I've had a good meal. I thought after the disappearances I would go without it for the remainder of my life. What a treat." Dan was no longer going to be the last man on Earth.